These leaked videos have exposed the dark secrets within the church, leaving millions of believers around the world shocked and disturbed. The shocking revelations, ranging from abuse and corruption to secret rituals, have pulled back the curtain on truths that had long been hidden. This not only shakes the faith of the church's followers, but also forces the world to confront serious questions about the integrity of one of the most powerful religious institutions. What do you think about these revelations? Do you believe the church can rise again from its own ashes? If you agree with what's happening, drop a 1 in the comments, or if you have a different opinion, feel free to leave a 0. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to support the channel and stay updated with our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and have an amazing day. These are not just allegations. What was captured on tape are bitter confessions and the heartbreaking cries of decades of silence. But the story doesn't end there. Hidden beneath the grand halls of the Vatican, long-concealed secret rituals have also been recorded. Mystical ceremonies that raise unsettling questions about power manipulation and the mysteries lying at the very heart of the church. In a final message filled with emotion and deep sorrow, Pope Francis firmly declared that the Catholic Church must undergo a collapse in order to be reborn. He emphasized that the ancient empire of power, which has endured for centuries, must be burned down so that the truth can be fully resurrected, no matter how great and painful the cost of that purification may be. This is not merely a warning, but a powerful declaration of the transformative change the Church must undergo to break free from the shadows of its past and move toward a future of transparency, honesty, and renewed hope. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as an unshakable symbol of sacredness and authority, a place where moral standards were upheld and revered. St. Peter's Basilica, with its towering walls and magnificent dome, has long represented the purity and power of the Church. But beneath that radiant exterior, a storm has been quietly brewing from deep within. A fierce storm, powerful enough to shake the faith of millions, now threatens to expose the dark secrets that have been carefully buried for centuries. That storm is no longer a theory or a rumor. It has become an undeniable reality, challenging everything the Church has built. Pope Francis has always been known as a symbol of deep compassion and an unwavering spirit of reform, someone who isn't afraid to challenge outdated values and entrenched conservative norms to pave the way for renewal. However, the revelations he is now facing go beyond imagination, darker and more tragic than anyone ever dared to envision. So much so that even his most loyal supporters can scarcely believe these truths. The story began with mysterious messages circulating from anonymous sources, warnings and tips about shocking evidence. At first, many dismissed these rumors, considering them just old gossip they had grown accustomed to regarding scandals within the Church. However, over time, these rumors not only persisted, but also grew in both frequency and accuracy, gradually becoming clearer and harder to deny. Then the first video appeared publicly. Although the image quality was blurry and the weak lighting made it difficult to distinguish details, the one thing that could not be denied was its authenticity. In the video, a cardinal with a worn face and empty, pained eyes sat before the camera and confessed to acts of deception, power manipulation, and the abuse of his position within the Church. His trembling voice revealed buried truths that the Church had desperately tried to conceal, including long-hidden cases that spanned decades. The big question arises, why were these videos made public at this time? Who is behind recording and distributing them? And most importantly, why has Pope Francis kept these tapes hidden, not acting immediately when he had the evidence in hand? The story unfolded further as more than 150 secret videos were leaked, each carrying the distinct mark of the deepest secrets within the Vatican. Some videos exposed financial manipulation, organized criminal activities, and systematic cover-ups that spanned years. There were even more disturbing tapes recording cases of abuse and the relentless efforts to conceal them, sending chills down the spine. But the most shocking revelation was the involvement and direct role of Pope Francis himself. According to the leaked information, he had secretly organized a large-scale campaign to gather confessions from high-ranking officials, including some of his closest allies. His risky decision to record these sensitive and disturbing confessions without taking immediate public action has led observers to raise many deep questions and theories. As soon as the videos began to be released, the Vatican quickly responded, officially denying the authenticity of the footage and pledging to conduct an internal investigation. However, every effort by the Church to control the damage and limit the spread of the videos ended in failure. The international community and global public closely followed each development, constantly raising important questions that remained unanswered. Some experts and observers suggest that the Pope may be quietly gathering evidence in preparation for a wide-ranging reform, a drastic change aimed at purifying the Church from within. On the other hand, there is also a theory that he may be blackmailed or forced into silence due to threats and pressure from dark forces within the institution. The boldest theory, which has sparked much discussion, is that Pope Francis might see himself as a modern martyr, someone who accepts gathering and preserving the truth so that, one day, he can expose everything regardless of the dangers and the price he must pay. Whatever the truth behind these secrets may be, one thing is certain. The Catholic Church is facing a momentous historical turning point, where truth, justice, and salvation are weighed on a scale of great challenge and hope. The difficult journey ahead demands courage, perseverance, and unwavering faith, not only from the leaders but also from all the faithful around the world. But the truth is even more complex. As more details emerge, it becomes clear that Pope Francis is truly planning something revolutionary, a move that will forever change the Church. In one of the most shocking videos to be leaked, the Pope himself appears, his face weary and heavy, tears glistening in his eyes as he delivers a direct message to the camera. The Church must collapse in order to be reborn. We have become an empire of power, not of faith. We must burn down that empire to resurrect the true gospel. It is a bold and painful statement, a declaration that the current institution has strayed too far from its spiritual roots, to the point that only a complete collapse can restore its integrity. In his final message, Pope Francis called on the Church to abandon wealth, power, and influence in order to return to a humble community rooted in the teachings of Christ rather than pursuing power. This call for rebirth has received mixed reactions. Some praise it as the courageous act of a true reformer, while others condemn it as a betrayal, accusing Francis of scheming to destroy the church from within. There are still those who question his mental state, suggesting that the immense pressure of leading a flawed institution has driven him to the brink. Yet, amidst the chaos, a deeper question remains. What will happen to the Vatican from here? Will these leaks inspire a new era of transparency and repentance? Or will the Church once again close itself off, denying its sins while excluding those who dare to expose the truth? The whole world is watching, yet the Vatican remains silent. Inside, a battle is unfolding, not just a fight for power, but for the soul of the Catholic Church. Will they heed Pope Francis's call to embrace humility and truth? Or will they continue to protect the power that has been entrenched for centuries? The Pope has chosen his path. He has exposed the rot within, offering a path to redemption through destruction. But as the consequences continue to unfold, no one knows for sure whether the Church will follow that path or resist it to the very end. The storm has arrived, bringing with it a new chapter, murky, uncertain, for one of the oldest institutions in the world. The dark corridors of the Vatican have always kept many secrets. Some things are whispered in candlelit rooms, others are etched in stone and buried beneath centuries of tradition. But nothing is as powerful or dangerous as what has been recorded in the secret tapes of Pope Francis. From a whisper, everything is transformed into a storm, shaking the very foundation of the Church. And the question that echoes in the minds of everyone is simple, yet profoundly timely. Why did he do it? And how could he carry out one of the boldest acts of religious espionage in modern history? To understand the origins of these secret recordings, we must first understand the man behind it all. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, a figure who is no stranger to controversy or reform. His rise to the papacy was marked by a stark contrast with his predecessors. He refused to live in the luxurious apartments of the Vatican, choosing instead to reside in a modest guest house. He did not speak from a gilded throne, but from simple wooden chairs, his voice always filled with compassion for the marginalized and the outcasts of society. But it was his relentless pursuit of transparency within the Church that led him down the path of confrontation with some of the most powerful forces within the institution. The first whispers of corruption reached his ears long before the cameras began rolling. Anonymous letters slipped under his door, confessions murmured during late-night services, and unsettling rumors from trusted advisors. Francis listened. He always listened. But he knew that whispers alone would not be enough. The Vatican is fortified by centuries of secrets, its walls thick with silence, its corridors guarded by tradition. To confront the rotting decay within, Francis needed more than faith. He needed evidence. And so the plan began to take shape. At first, everything started small, almost harmless, just private conversations in his office. Francis invited the cardinals to talk, moments of quiet, prayer, and what were supposed to be confessions. He spoke to them not as the head of the Church, but as a shepherd guiding his flock back to righteousness. They confessed their sins, spoke of mistakes, and sometimes, if encouraged enough, whispered about the dark truths buried deep within the heart of the Vatican. The confessions were horrifying. Abuse, blackmail, and financial crimes spilled from their mouths as if the burden of these secrets had become too heavy to keep hidden. But words are fragile. Francis knew that if he wanted real change, if he wanted true reform, he needed something permanent. He needed those confessions to be recorded, etched into time, irrefutable. And so, cameras were installed. The operation was carried out discreetly, intricately, like a military campaign. Small, undetectable devices, no larger than a coin, were placed in the rooms where high-ranking officials frequently met. Private offices, the retreat room, and even the confessionals were equipped with advanced recording technology capable of capturing not only images, but even the faintest whispers. Loyal members within the Pope's inner circle helped carry out the mission. Their loyalty to Francis and his vision of a purer church surpassing any fear of retaliation from the Vatican. The first recordings were cautious, testing the equipment and assessing the level of cooperation. But as weeks turned into months, Francis grew bolder. He began inviting specific individuals, those frequently mentioned in the whispers of corruption, to private meetings, disguised as prayer and repentance sessions. They spoke freely, unaware that every word was being recorded. The recordings revealed a darkness far beyond the imagination of outsiders. One cardinal confessed to decades of child abuse, hidden by a network of silence and bribery. Another spoke of embezzling millions of dollars from charity donations, funneled into personal accounts and overseas banks. And even more terrifying were the whispers of cover-ups orchestrated not only within the church, but extending into political arenas far beyond Rome. Francis watched each recording, his face expressionless, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He did not smile at the confessions, nor did he show surprise. It was as if he had always known, like the secrets of the Vatican had been etched into his soul long before he ascended to the papal throne. However, despite the evidence piling up in the secret vaults beneath the Vatican, Francis remained silent. For years, the tapes lay dormant, gathering dust, hidden from curious eyes. Many speculated that he was waiting for the right moment, that the silence was a strategy. But other whispers suggested that even the Pope was not safe from the dark forces within the most powerful ranks of the Church. His closest advisors had repeatedly urged him to act, to bring the evidence to light and cleanse the Church of its sins. But Francis continued to wait. He waited as scandals broke in the media, as the whispers grew louder, and as the faithful began to lose trust in the holiness of the institution. His patience did not stem from fear, but from necessity. He knew that if he acted too soon, not only would he be exposed, but so would those who had risked everything to help him. He needed the right moment, a perfect storm of outrage and opportunity to finally expose the truth. And then, that moment came. A security leak at the Vatican, seemingly a small incident at first, led to the exposure of several audio recordings. Initially, it was just one blurry video, poorly lit but undeniable. A cardinal confessed to acts of abuse, recounting cover-ups that had lasted for decades. The media exploded. The questions came fast and furious. The Vatican scrambled to contain the fallout. But it was too late. The gates had been thrown wide open. Anonymous sources began releasing more videos, one after another, until over 150 recordings flooded the internet. The truth, buried beneath layers of tradition and secrecy, was finally exposed for the world to witness. The Vatican's response was swift and brutal. They denied everything, hunted down whistleblowers, and accusations of fraud and defamation echoed from churches across the globe. But the evidence was irrefutable. Clear faces, unmistakable voices. The church had ensnared itself in its own web of lies. Pope Francis watched it all from his private room, his gaze as calm as ever. Those close to him said that he was unfazed when the news erupted, and he didn't try to deny his role. He was the one who orchestrated the recordings, gathered the evidence, and waited for the perfect moment to bring the truth to light. In the days that followed, Francis did not appear with apologies or denials, but with a call for rebirth, a plea that the church must burn away its corruption in order to rise again pure, free from the sins that had plagued it for centuries. Many called it madness, others called it a prophecy, but for Francis it was simply the truth he had known, recorded, and ultimately set free. The origins of the secret recordings did not come from conspiracy or betrayal, but from a single, unwavering desire to cleanse the church of its sins, tear away the veil of concealment, and expose the truth in all its horrifying nakedness. And in doing so, Pope Francis laid the groundwork for the greatest purge Vatican had ever witnessed. The room was dark, with only the flickering light of candles casting shadows on the stone walls. Thick curtains were drawn tight, shielding the meeting from prying eyes and inquisitive minds. It was within these hidden chambers, deep inside the Vatican, that the confessions took place. Men cloaked in purple and scarlet sat in silence, heads bowed, hands tightly clasped as though trying to hold on to their secrets with the desperation of the damned. But tonight, secrets would no longer be their ally. Pope Francis had orchestrated everything with the precision of a master chess player. For months, he summoned high-ranking officials, cardinals, bishops, and even secretaries within the Holy See to private reflection sessions. Under the guise of penance and spiritual guidance, they entered his chamber unaware that the soft candlelight did not merely obscure the darkness, but also concealed hidden cameras. Cleverly disguised within intricate carvings, behind statues of saints and martyrs, were tiny cameras, almost invisible, yet sharp enough to capture every detail without mercy. The confessions began softly. A cardinal spoke of misjudgments, minor faults, and decisions that were more political than spiritual. Confessions intended to please the Pope, to show a hint of humanity amidst the sea of righteousness. But Francis, with the patience honed over years of facing Vatican's internal politics, always waited. He listened intently, his hand resting lightly on his thigh, his eyes unwavering, then gently asked, "How many people know about this? And who else was present?" At first, the cardinals hesitated, their eyes betraying fear and calculation. But Francis, with the calm demeanor of a father figure and an unshakable presence, gently encouraged them, reminding them of their sacred vows, their responsibility to God and the Church, and the conversations lasted until dawn, as the walls of the Vatican grew colder and silence engulfed the ancient halls. As the first light of morning broke, the secrets began to spill out. The recordings captured it all. Faces twisted with regret, voices trembling as they recounted decades of abuse hidden behind the impenetrable walls of the church. There were stories of priests being reassigned from one parish to another, not for their merits, but for their crimes. Crimes too terrible to be exposed, yet too frequent to be ignored. One recording shows a cardinal confessing that he personally allowed a priest who had committed abuse to be transferred to South America under the guise of a missionary assignment. He spoke about families who had begged for justice, their letters discarded, their cries for help ignored. His voice choked as he mentioned the hush money taken from the church's charitable funds to keep them silent. Another, more horrifying video recorded a bishop confessing to covering up abuse in an orphanage. The details were truly chilling. Vulnerable boys and girls, completely unprotected, handed over to people chosen not for their faith, but for their silence. Francis remained unfazed as the bishop recounted the events, his gaze fixed on him as if seeing the man for the first time. "What about the children?" Francis asked softly. The bishop's hands trembled. He had no answer. It wasn't just the abuse that was exposed in these confessions, but an entire systematic network of cover-ups behind it. Senior officials spoke about coded messages sent through Vatican's internal channels, alerting dioceses about the reassignment of priests under suspicion. The faithful were told their priest was called to serve elsewhere. Their sins were swept under the golden rug of holiness. Those who dared to speak out were silenced, sometimes with threats, often with money, and not infrequently with a gentle reminder of the eternal punishment awaiting those who opposed the church. The recordings also reveal that this network of silence stretched across the globe, not just in Italy or Europe, but also in the United States, Africa, and Asia. The abuse was not an anomaly, nor was it rare. It was carried out systematically, coordinated, and shielded by a cloak of faith and power. The offending priests were sent to church-run rehabilitation centers, where they spent a few months in what was called reflection before being reassigned to new parishes, where the congregations were unaware. The cycle repeated. The sins were buried. The victims were forgotten. Pope Francis watched those recordings every night, alone in his private room, the light from the screen casting long shadows on his tired face. He took careful notes, writing names, dates, and locations into a leather-bound notebook. He wrote in silence, only pausing to cross-reference the information with Vatican records. Records that had once been thought to be destroyed, but were preserved by some with the belief that one day, the truth would matter. The deeper Francis dug, the darker the truths he uncovered. It wasn't just priests and bishops involved in the abuse. There were also powerful figures within the Vatican's financial system. The recordings revealed money being used to silence victims, funds being transferred from charity accounts to pay off families, and intricate money laundering schemes through the Vatican Bank to cover up the traces. In one particularly damning recording, a high-ranking official confessed to manipulating the church's investments to launder money for criminal organizations. He said, "We had to do it to protect the church." Pope Francis listened to every word, his face showing no emotion. He didn't interrupt, nor did he offer absolution. He simply nodded, encouraging them to continue, knowing that every word spoken in that room was being recorded, stored, and cataloged. His purpose was not to judge, but to document the truth. And then, it became clear to Francis that this web of corruption was too vast, too deep to be cleansed with a few words or symbolic gestures. The rot had lasted through many generations, not only within the clergy, but also deeply embedded in the political and financial foundations of the Vatican. There were whispers about alliances with governments, power deals to help criminals evade the law. In one of the most chilling recordings, a cardinal boasted about his influence at European courts, where lawsuits against the church were quietly dismissed and whistleblowers were defamed. The Pope's inner circle panicked as the recordings were slowly revealed. They urged him to destroy everything, bury the truth before it could completely destroy the church. But Francis refused. He quietly said, "The truth must be known." Despite the warnings of fierce backlash from the faithful, the dangers he would face, the Pope persisted, silently watching each tape every night, his eyes heavy with both the horror and the sorrow of what he had uncovered. One sleepless night, he made an irreversible decision. There would be no more silence, no more protection for the betrayers. Those confessions, both in sound and image, would be made public, not just to the Vatican, but to the whole world. That decision was his final act of defiance, his last hope to cleanse the church from darkness and restore the lost soul. But it also marked the beginning of a chain of shocking events. His closest advisors turned their backs. Secret meetings were held to find ways to depose the Pope. Whispers of a coup echoed through the marble halls, adorned with gold leaf and ancient embroidered carpets, places once seen as symbols of purity, faith, and divine power. Behind that exterior, Francis had witnessed another reality. A world where faith had become a commercial tool, and salvation was bargained like a commodity. The tapes revealed not just accounting errors or poor management, but a sophisticated network of corruption, disguised under the guise of divine duty. Initially, there were temporary transfers of money from one fund to another, with donations being redirected. But gradually, the true nature began to emerge. Systematic embezzlement, millions of euros siphoned away from the poor to fund villas, luxury cars, and untraceable offshore investments. Francis sat across from the cardinals, listening to every confession. They spoke of secret meetings in lavish villas, where massive investments were decided with shady partners. They mentioned underground banks, shell companies in tax havens, and transactions designed to bypass all systems of scrutiny. One cardinal trembled as he spoke of projects to build schools and hospitals in South America. On the surface, symbols of humanitarianism, but in reality, just a pretext for embezzlement. "We called it the hand of God," he whispered, avoiding eye contact. "Invisible, untouchable." Francis didn't show any emotion, but his grip tightened. The projects he had once blessed, the speeches he had once boldly made about the duty to the poor, now they were nothing but proof of lies. Another bishop recounted lavish parties held with embezzled money, with French champagne and Russian caviar, all disguised under the guise of charity. The recordings continued, revealing villas purchased under the guise of retreat centers, stretching from the hills of Tuscany to the Amalfi Coast, yet never used for contemplation. They were where covert alliances were formed, safe havens for secrets. In one of the recordings, the issue of blackmail came up. A bishop confessed, "We are always the ones who keep secrets. Politicians, businessmen, they come to us for protection." These confessions, which should have been for salvation, were exploited as tools of control. Affairs, hidden accounts, illegal deals, all meticulously stored, to be used only when necessary. "Very effective," he said, his fingers white from gripping too tightly. Francis sat in silence, listening intently, as if encouraging them to continue. The stories grew darker. Journalists abandoning investigations after threats, businessmen increasing donations when their personal secrets were mentioned. The secret vaults beneath the Vatican were brought up, not filled with relics, but with documents, copies of letters, tax records, personal files. "That's our insurance," the bishop confessed, "to ensure silence and loyalty." Francis knew about those vaults. He had caught glimpses of them during official tours. But now, as the truth was laid bare, there was no way to justify it. The church's power was not just spiritual, but political. And it was maintained through manipulation, not just of individuals, but entire nations. A high-ranking cardinal admitted Vatican had once coordinated high-interest loans for developing countries. When governments failed to repay, Vatican did not forgive. It seized land, property, and influence. "We are the shepherds," he said without a hint of remorse. "And sometimes the flock needs to be led with a firm hand." Finally, the recording that truly shook Francis emerged. A cardinal, deeply involved in financial transactions, casually described a money laundering system spanning continents. Donations from the faithful were funneled through shell companies, cleaned in Swiss, Singaporean, and Caribbean banks, and then returned in the form of investments, bribes, or political funding. He smiled as he spoke, proud as if he were bragging about an achievement. "We've been doing this for years," he said. "Decades, even. No one suspects a thing. After all, who would ever accuse the church?" Francis slowly closed his eyes in a moment of quiet contemplation. He deeply understood that once these recordings were made public, the world would never again view the Vatican in the same way. The image of reverence and sanctity that had surrounded the world's foremost center of religious power would shatter under the glaring light of truth. But at the same time, he was fully aware that, no matter how painful the truth might be, it was the only path to true healing and lasting change. With unwavering resolve, Pope Francis was ready to pay the heavy price, to accept the loneliness and trials, in order to lead the church toward a purer future. No smile appeared on his face as his thoughtful gaze followed the man before him, a man arrogantly boasting about the vast fortune accumulated through deception, cleverly orchestrated lies to manipulate hearts, and faith twisted and exploited as a tool for personal ambition. It was not only a betrayal of the trust of the people, but also a stabbing of the core values, the sacred principles upon which the church had been built over millennia. However, Pope Francis had yet to take decisive action. Not yet. The secret recordings continued to be gathered, and with each passing day, more irrefutable evidence piled up. He understood that confronting the widespread corruption within the Vatican's ranks would require more than just faith. It would demand immense courage and a steely determination. This was a ruthless purge, a direct confrontation with those closest to him, individuals he had once prayed with, shared meals with, and considered as brothers. This battle would shake the very foundations of the Vatican, challenging the faith of millions of devoted believers around the world. Pope Francis, with unwavering resolve and a heart full of passion, continued to record every whispered word of dark confessions, every arrogant boast, knowing that each passing moment brought him closer to his ultimate goal, complete redemption. Not just the redemption of the fractured and decaying church, but also for all those who had been harmed and abandoned in the blind pursuit of power and glory. The financial crimes, the dark acts of blackmail and corruption exposed through these secret recordings would serve as the solid foundation for his mission of rebuilding and reform, the spark that ignited irreversible change. However, as Francis prepared to face the inevitable storm, he came to deeply understand one thing. The secrets being revealed were far more brutal and shocking than the public could have ever imagined. He had directly watched the recordings, comprehending every hidden corner, every sin buried deep within the darkest halls of the Vatican, things that had never been allowed to see the light of day. And soon, the entire world would have to witness that dark truth, facing a Vatican no longer a symbol of purity, but an institution struggling to reclaim its soul and its sanctity. The Vatican has long been shrouded in a thick veil of mystery. Its towering walls, ancient moss-covered corridors, and winding paths within the holy site are not only witnesses to thousands of years of religious history, but also house countless secrets that no one has dared to reveal. To the outside world, the Vatican is the heart of faith and the soul of the Catholic Church, a symbol of purity, compassion, and sacred morality. But to those who have walked its shadowy halls, those who have heard the whispers in its deepest corners, the Vatican appears as something entirely different, a parallel world full of dark secrets and rituals carefully hidden from view. In that place, rituals not meant for public eyes take place quietly under the cold gaze of stone statues and unmoving saints. The secret recordings of Pope Francis not only capture the confessions of cardinals, powerful figures within the church, and the flow of money transferred through secret banks. Hundreds of hours of video reveal even more chilling and horrifying scenes. Underground ceremonies held in secret, in stark contrast to the official teachings and public rituals that the faithful have always known. These rituals are carried out in dimly lit rooms deep beneath the basilica, places inaccessible to the outside world, representing a complete distortion of the traditional ceremonies of communion and confession. They are ancient customs, shielded and protected at all costs by those who have sworn to preserve their sanctity, no matter the price. It all began with a video capturing a single ritual, which at first glance appeared to be a typical midnight mass. However, it was completely different from anything Pope Francis had ever witnessed. The video, secretly filmed with a hidden lens, showed a group of people dressed in mysterious red and black robes, their faces completely obscured by hoods embroidered with symbols that could not be found in any official Vatican archive, and were certainly not meant for the eyes of the outside world. On the altar lay an ancient book, its leather cover so worn and fragile that it seemed on the verge of falling apart under the weight of time. The person opening the book was dressed more elaborately than the others, wearing gloves and handling the book with great care, as if following a sacred ritual. The symbols on his hood were not hidden, embroidered with shimmering silver thread, crosses interwoven with serpents, wings covering the eyes, creating an image both mysterious and terrifying. The chanting began to fill the space, initially a quiet whisper, but gradually growing louder, reverberating off the cold stone walls and spreading to every dark corner of the room. The sound was unlike any usual praise or prayer. It was a deep, rhythmic melody delivered in an ancient language that Pope Francis could not recognize, yet it stirred a deep sense of unease and discomfort within his soul. The group moved in synchronized steps, circling the altar with precision, hands tightly clasped, heads bowed low in a ritualistic posture. This was not a ceremony honoring God. It was a ritual to summon a different, much older and more mysterious entity. The footage continued to capture each chilling detail. Items were brought into use, relics that Francis had once known, but this time they were not employed in the traditional way that the faithful would expect. A golden chalice with a jeweled rim was filled with a thick black liquid that shimmered faintly under the dim candlelight. Members of the ceremonial group took turns dipping their fingers into the chalice and marking their foreheads, chanting louder and louder, almost in a frenzy. The leader of the ritual raised his hand, the palm facing directly toward the altar as if blessing or summoning some supernatural force. In that moment, the camera flashed, the signal flickering for a few seconds before quickly returning to normal. The participants in the ritual remained in their bowed posture, but the atmosphere had grown heavier and darker than ever. Francis could feel the invisible pressure through the screen, a thick black veil pressing down on the space like an unmistakable warning. It was no longer reverence. It was something dark, ominous, and dangerous. These rituals are not merely symbolic. In reality, they serve as acts of communication with forces that the Church openly denies. Another video captures a gathering held deep within the catacombs, where the flickering light of torches lining the walls casts dancing shadows on the faces of those in attendance. Intricate symbols are meticulously drawn on the ground. The elaborate patterns sprawling across the stone floor seem to pulse with a rhythm of their own. The participants kneel in silence, heads bowed low, as chants echo from the depths of the chamber, spreading through the tunnels like eerie whispers. The one leading the ritual is a cardinal renowned for his devotion, holding a staff engraved with a symbol that merges the cross and the crescent moon. His voice steady, he recites passages from a book that bears no seal of the Vatican. These chants are not prayers in the way the world understands them, but rather invocations, a summons to forces never acknowledged by the modern Church. The ritual harkens back to a time when the line between faith and the arcane was blurred, when the Church's power drew not only from Scripture but also from deep and ancient mysteries. More terrifying than anything else is a video recorded in a room that even Pope Francis himself has never seen. The footage is silent, yet the images alone send chills down the spine. A circle of high-ranking officials standing around a stone altar, upon which lie shimmering objects under dim light. Relics such as bones wrapped in silk, fragments of ancient texts, and a dagger with a Latin-inscribed hilt that Francis immediately recognized. It was a ceremonial blade, never used in any official rite of the modern Church. The men stood whispering in the shadows, each placing a hand on the dagger in turn, murmuring words too faint to decipher. Yet their purpose was unmistakable. Francis watched as a scroll of leather was unrolled on the altar, its surface covered in symbols older than the Church itself, speaking of binding, sacrifice, and power drawn from both the living and the dead. Every movement in the ritual was carried out slowly and precisely, as if it had been performed countless. What horrified the Pope was not only the nature of the rituals themselves, but the faces of those performing them. Men he had once shared meals with, prayed alongside, men who had led Mass and offered the Eucharist to thousands of the faithful. Seeing them take part in acts so utterly opposed to the teachings of the Church delivered a profound shock, one that shook the very foundations of his faith. These recordings were not isolated incidents, but a collection spanning many years, documenting secret gatherings held in hidden chambers, catacombs, and sanctuaries reserved only for the highest ranks within the Vatican. The rituals were carried out with deliberate precision, adhering to ancient rites passed down through whispers and secret texts, echoing a time when faith and power were inseparable, when the Church governed not only the souls of the faithful, but also manipulated unseen forces at work in the world. Pope Francis gazed into the distance, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. He was deeply aware that what he had witnessed was not merely symbolic. It was the remnant of a dark history the Church had long tried to bury beneath layers of doctrine and tradition. Yet the recordings could not be erased or concealed. They preserved the truth with unyielding clarity. Now the pressing question was how to deal with this evidence. Revealing it would shatter the faith of millions and expose a shadowed chapter of the Vatican that had remained hidden for centuries. But to remain silent would be to allow corruption to spread unchecked, letting those who performed these rites continue without punishment. The Vatican has now become a tense fortress, where hallways that once echoed with prayers are filled instead with whispers of betrayal and fear. The atmosphere within the Holy See has grown heavy, uncertain, as news of the leaked videos spreads. What has shaken the Church to its core is not only the public outrage, but the undeniable truth. The one behind the recording and preservation of these videos is none other than Pope Francis himself. He was the one who arranged the cameras, gathered confessions, and holds the evidence capable of destroying the reputations of some of the most powerful figures in the Vatican. The cardinals gathered in the apostolic palace with heavy hearts, not for a ceremony, but driven by the urgency of the moment. They sat in silence, their red robes spreading across the marble floor like pools of dried blood. The air in the room was stifling, as if foreshadowing an impending disaster. Though they had weathered numerous scandals, from abuse and financial misconduct to internal conflicts, never before had they faced evidence so clear, undeniable, and explosive. The whispered exchanges carried a range of emotions, from denial to suspicion, but the truth staring back at them could no longer be ignored. When Pope Francis appeared, he wasn't wearing his papal vestments, just a simple white cassock. His modest yet commanding presence silenced the room. There were no formalities, no entourage. He simply took his seat at the head of the table, placed both hands on the ornately carved surface, and looked at each person in turn with a solemn gaze. No opening words were needed. Everyone knew why they were there. The Pope spoke plainly, confirming that he had watched the videos himself, and that he had personally authorized the recordings and the gathering of the confessions. It was all true, undeniable. A suffocating silence settled over the room. The first reaction came from an older cardinal, skeptical in his stance, suggesting that the videos could have been fabricated to undermine the church. However, the undeniable truth stood before them, as the familiar faces on the videos were individuals they knew well. Pope Francis asserted that the church could no longer live in lies and that he had no intention of destroying anyone, but only wanted to confront the corruption, abuse, and betrayal of the sacred mission that had quietly festered within. Despite harsh opposition and criticism, with some accusing him of turning the church into a laughingstock, the Pope remained resolute, insisting that those who exploited their power were the real traitors, while he was simply revealing the truth. Some of the cardinals suggested handling the matter internally to avoid a scandalous public spectacle, but Pope Francis argued that this approach had been used for centuries and only worsened the problem. The faithful deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful, because the church could not stand above that truth. The church must purify itself, bring the wrongdoers into the light before both God and the law, for it cannot preach justice and mercy while covering up betrayal. Although handing over the offending priests to secular courts was controversial, it was necessary if the church hoped to regain the trust of the world. The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere, with sharp disagreements and many cardinals expressing concerns about the future of the church. However, Pope Francis believed firmly that the church must endure, not as a fortress of lies and power, but as a place of faith, hope, and salvation. The church must always remember that its purpose is to serve God, not itself, and in order to do so, purification and transparency are the unavoidable path forward. The room was engulfed in a suffocating silence, no one daring to speak. Pope Francis leaned forward, his gaze sorrowful yet resolute. He was acutely aware that his position was not that of a powerful ruler, but of a shepherd guiding a flock that needed to be led with sincerity and responsibility. He understood that to earn trust and followership, the flock must first see the worthiness in their leader, and that could only be built on a foundation of truth and integrity. The Pope could not remain idle while the Church was slowly becoming a refuge for the corrupt, an institution losing its soul within the firm walls of power. He realized that the time had come to make a clear choice: either protect the church institution at any cost, regardless of the consequences, or have the courage to save the fractured soul within it. His words echoed in the space, both a steadfast declaration and a heavy challenge to all present. The cardinals exchanged glances, some quietly agreed with his stance, while many others maintained a resistant attitude, fearful of the inevitable consequences ahead. The road ahead was predicted to be fraught with dangers, from fierce legal battles to public condemnation, and even the possibility of facing threats to one's life. However, Pope Francis remained firm in his position, for he had seen the root of the corruption spreading within the Church and was determined not to let it continue to grow. The confrontation in that room came to an end, but the battle to purify and renew the Church still lay ahead, full of hardship and challenges. As each cardinal left the meeting room with pale faces and weary eyes, a clear truth emerged: the Vatican would never be the same again. Pope Francis understood that his path had been set, whether he walked it alone or with companions. This was a story yet to unfold. The Church stood at a crucial crossroads, and he would do whatever it took to lead this institution toward the light of salvation, even if it meant dismantling the very power that had sustained it for centuries. For centuries, the Vatican prided itself on its secrecy, firmly protected by towering walls and long-held traditions, with an authority that seemed unshakable. Rumors of scandals and corruption had always existed, but they were buried deep within the distant marble corridors, far from the prying eyes of the public. However, everything changed the day the secret recordings began to leak. It was not just one video or a solitary confession, but a torrent of incriminating evidence flooding into the digital world, tearing apart the facade of holiness that the Church had worked so hard to maintain. The first video appeared suddenly and without warning, uploaded to a well-known website dedicated to whistleblower leaks, ushering in a new era full of upheaval and challenges for the entire Vatican. Although the images in the leaked videos were somewhat blurry, they were clear enough to identify the faces of high-ranking cardinals participating in secret confession sessions. Their voices, though distorted and muffled by poor sound quality, made their confessions unmistakable. The content recorded included detailed descriptions of abusive behaviors, confessions of complex financial crimes, and cryptic allusions to secret rituals hidden from the public eye. Initially, many believed this was merely a sophisticated hoax, or at the very least, an attempt to tarnish and undermine the reputation of the Church. However, as analysts began to seriously verify each video, clear and undeniable evidence started to emerge. What the world was witnessing was not just vague allegations, but a harsh truth, and this was only the beginning of an unprecedented crisis. Vatican's first response to the event came swiftly and predictably. Official statements were released denying the authenticity of the videos, asserting that they were the result of digital manipulation techniques designed to create division and undermine the trust of both the faithful and the public. But just as those denials were issued, new videos continued to emerge, each one adding weight to the mounting evidence. On social media platforms, anonymous accounts began to widely share links to encrypted websites, where hundreds of hours of video were systematically stored, meticulously categorized by the names of those appearing, dates, and locations of the recordings. Each video was clearly marked with the precision and organization of an index catalog, leaving anyone who followed the leaks overwhelmed by the scale and professionalism of the release. The world watched in shock as a series of videos exposed the darkest corners of the most powerful figures within the Vatican. In the footage, many cardinals appeared as the central figures, confessing crimes that had long been rumored, but never had any convincing evidence. Sophisticated financial transactions, hidden under layers of shell companies, were laid bare through footage time-stamped from secret meetings. Documents were signed, agreements made, and money transferred casually as if part of everyday business. Yet behind it all was a vast network of corruption. What shocked the public even more were the mysterious rituals captured on film. These ceremonies took place in the dead of night, held in secret rooms deep beneath the basilica, with purposes shrouded in mystery, evoking an unexplainable fear. Panic gradually spread within the walls of the Vatican as the matter began to be brought to light. An emergency conference was immediately convened, gathering the most influential cardinals and advisors within the Church to discuss how to handle the leaks and trace the origin of the videos being disseminated. Security measures were thoroughly reviewed, and internal investigations were launched with the goal of identifying the culprit. However, the damage was irreversible, as the videos continued to spread at a pace far beyond the Vatican's control. They were quickly copied onto hundreds of websites, downloaded and widely shared by activist groups and concerned individuals, ensuring that these pieces of evidence remained in the public eye. In every internal discussion at the Vatican, the biggest question was how such an event could unfold so dramatically. For years, the secret recordings of Pope Francis had been protected with the utmost caution, known only to a few of his most trusted aides. They were stored on encrypted drives in an ultra-secure archive beneath the Pope's apartments, accessible only through biometric authentication, combined with a series of secret access codes known to only a select few. Yet now, the videos had been made public, and the entire world was watching as the darkest secrets of the Church were exposed. The investigation was conducted quietly and seriously, led by a group of Swiss guards carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion. They reviewed surveillance footage, examined data logs, and interviewed everyone with access to the archive. However, all traces leading to the perpetrator grew cold. There were no signs of unauthorized access, no abnormalities in the data system, and no indicators suggesting an external attack. It seemed as though the secret recordings had mysteriously disappeared from the archive, only to later appear online in an equally mysterious way. The breakthrough in the investigation came from an unexpected source, a young secretary working in the vast library of the Vatican, responsible for storing historical documents. During a routine check of encrypted communication logs, she noticed something unusual. Large data packages had been sent from within the Vatican's walls to an encrypted server located in an Eastern European country. The data transfer was executed with such sophistication that it was nearly undetectable, hidden beneath multiple layers of proxy servers and disguised as routine data synchronization. What was most striking was that the timing of the data transfer perfectly matched the first appearance of the videos online. When the secretary reported her discovery to her superiors, she was instructed to remain silent and focus on her work, being told that more complex security matters would be handled by the experts. However, she could not ignore the truth she had uncovered. Instead of staying quiet, she decided to send an anonymous email to a well-known investigative journalist who specialized in exposing scandals within the Vatican, attaching the data logs and timestamps related to the discovery. Within hours, the journalist publicly revealed the discovery, sparking a fierce media storm. The Vatican hastily dismissed the accusations, calling it a fabricated conspiracy aimed at damaging the Church's reputation. However, the evidence that was released was clear, undeniable, and showed that the leak indeed originated from within the Vatican itself. Panic within the Church's leadership quickly turned into suspicion and distrust as investigations were expanded and shifted toward internal sources. Pope Francis demanded a clear answer to the situation. Each member of the Pope's inner circle was thoroughly interrogated, their loyalty placed under a microscope, and every activity and movement was meticulously monitored. Yet the true culprit remained hidden behind layers of anonymity, protected by complex encryption. Hypotheses were proposed everywhere. Some believed the leaker was a disillusioned member of the clergy, someone who had lost faith in the ever-growing corruption within the Church. Others suspected it was a plot by rival factions within the Vatican, aiming to undermine Pope Francis's power. Some even suggested that the leak might have been orchestrated by the Pope himself, a move to raise public awareness and resist the corruption he had been fighting against for years. However, the true identity of the leaker remained a mystery, yet to be solved. Although the origin of the incident remained unclear, its impact was undeniable. The videos spread at an unprecedented speed, becoming a hot topic of discussion worldwide. Media outlets delved into each confession, and social media platforms buzzed with countless theories, debates, and public outrage. Protest groups gathered outside churches, demanding transparency and justice. Meanwhile, every attempt by the church to control and limit the scandal seemed to fail. Each time the Vatican issued a denial, another video would appear, along with a new confession and another layer of corruption exposed. Especially during this chaotic period, Pope Francis maintained an absolute silence. He did not deny the allegations, nor did he promise to conduct a public investigation. He did not appear on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to address the crowd gathering below, as his predecessors had done during previous crises. His silence seemed to only heighten curiosity and speculation, adding a new layer of mystery to the situation and plunging the entire Vatican into an unprecedented wave of doubt and controversy. Pope Francis quietly observed, witnessing the secret walls he had once quietly tried to dismantle from within, now being torn apart from the outside in an unstoppable force. Inside the Vatican, the tension reached unprecedented levels. Cardinals, who had once maintained unwavering loyalty, began whispering about betrayal, about the undeniable fractures within the Church. Secret meetings were held behind closed doors, where schemes and calculations were discussed in hushed tones, and alliances that had once been solid now grew suspicious and more fragile than ever. Traditional faith had crumbled, giving way to doubt and fear, weighing heavily on every step of those in power. For the first time in centuries, the Vatican was not under attack from external forces, but its own dark secrets and concealed sins became the dagger driving deep into the heart of the institution, laid bare before the eyes of the entire world. And just when it seemed the storm couldn't get worse, without warning, an anonymous leaker released another video, sharper in image quality, with clearer and more vivid sound. The video showed a man, his face obscured in shadow, speaking fluent Italian with strength and conviction, delivering a short but powerful message. This was just the beginning, and many more revelations would be made public. Truth would no longer be hidden. The video ended abruptly, leaving behind a chilling silence and a promise of further disclosures, leaving both the Vatican and the world stunned. Pope Francis understood the profound meaning behind this message. The walls that once protected the Vatican, walls that seemed impregnable, had now crumbled, not by the force of arms, but by the power of truth. The biggest question now was no longer whether the Church could collapse, but rather how deep that collapse would be before the process of salvation and rebirth could begin. The leaked videos had pushed the situation beyond control, and there was no way to return to the status quo. The consequences of the leaked recordings spread quickly and relentlessly, with no mercy. Across continents, reactions exploded with a force that transcended religious boundaries, profoundly affecting governments, religious communities, and nations. Things that had been whispered or hidden within the corridors of the Vatican for centuries were now exposed to the world, unedited and unfiltered. Confessions of abuse of power, financial manipulation, and secretive rituals concealed with great care shattered the sacred, untouchable image that the Vatican had built for so long. Millions of faithful around the world were grappling with the deepest crisis of faith in the history of the Church. In Rome, the heart of Christianity, the streets were filled with protesters, emotions swirling between anger, disappointment, and despair. Almost overnight, a large crowd had gathered at St. Peter's Square, holding signs demanding justice, transparency, and resignations to cleanse the Church. Many of the protesters could not hold back their tears, clutching their rosaries tightly in their hands, murmuring prayers full of confusion and anxiety, wondering how such a sacred institution could have fallen to this state. Some, particularly elderly women, knelt before the basilica in excruciating pain, crying out that they had been betrayed, that the Church was supposed to protect them and their children from such crimes. The official response from the Vatican was quickly issued, but it proved ineffective and almost impossible to convince. The statements condemned the leaks as an attack on the sanctity of the Church, accusing them as malicious acts by those who sought to undermine the faith and power of the Vatican. However, despite being repeatedly voiced, these words echoed in emptiness, as the evidence was too vivid and too clear to be dismissed as fabrication. The videos exposing cardinals confessing to horrific crimes, the footage of haunting secret rituals, and the undeniable evidence of financial corruption have left the global public stunned. On the political level, the event has caused an unprecedented, far-reaching impact. The Prime Minister of Italy, facing pressure from social unrest and the fierce public reaction, officially called for a comprehensive investigation into the Church's finances and its handling of abuse cases. He emphasized that this was an unprecedented step in history, but the power of public outrage left the Vatican leadership with no other choice. The Prime Minister firmly declared, "Faith cannot be a shield for corruption," and if the Vatican wants to maintain its influence and reputation, it must act with absolute integrity. His statement echoed across Europe, where governments began to reassess their complex and challenging relationships with the Catholic Church. In countries like France, Spain, and Germany, political leaders called for independent audits to review the assets and properties owned by the Church, citing deep concerns over poor financial management and a lack of transparency. The ripple effect was not limited to Europe. In South America, where Christianity remains deeply embedded in cultural identity, these shocking revelations sparked widespread protests from the bustling streets of São Paulo to the impoverished slums of Buenos Aires. The influence of the Church in the religious life of the people began to decline noticeably. Many local parishes reported an increase in the number of parishioners leaving the faith, as those who were once loyal turned their backs on an institution they felt had betrayed their trust and ideals. Many priests also found themselves caught in the whirlwind of scandal, unable to reconcile their genuine faith with the heinous crimes that had been exposed. They chose to resign, stepping down from their positions in order to preserve their own integrity. In the United States, where the Church had already faced numerous abuse scandals over the past 2 decades, this latest leak reignited a new wave of scrutiny. Politicians immediately called for investigations at the national level, while legal experts fiercely debated the possibility of summoning Vatican officials to testify in international courts. The victims of abuse, once silenced through settlement agreements or non-disclosure contracts, now found their voices, supported by the media and given a platform to share their stories, demanding justice and transparency. Their voices echoed loudly, creating unprecedented pressure on the Vatican. The political influence of the Catholic Church in the United States, once considered strong and nearly unshakable, began to show clear signs of wavering. Senators who had once sought the Church's endorsement and support now began to distance themselves, facing mounting pressure from the public and media to speak out against the cover-ups within the Vatican. Some prominent Catholic figures in politics chose to speak out cautiously and reservedly, while others continued to defend the Church, viewing the scandal as part of a larger conspiracy aimed at destroying the ancient religious institution. However, the divisions within the political sphere also mirrored the deep wounds within the faithful community. Although the Church's protective forces remained strong, the public's trust had been shattered in a way that could not easily be repaired. Every effort to manage the political fallout and control the media could not fill the gap of broken trust. Meanwhile, in countries with lower Catholic populations, the scandal was met with a mix of deep skepticism and a certain sense of satisfaction. Those who had long criticized the Church, often labeled as conspiracy theorists or opponents, were now proven right in their constant warnings about serious internal issues within the Vatican. All these shocking developments have created an unprecedented historical turning point in the entire existence of the Catholic Church. The profound and comprehensive crisis of faith is forcing the Vatican to face challenges never seen before, surpassing all traditional limits. The Church is now compelled to look at itself squarely in the harsh light of truth and justice, confronting the dark secrets they have long sought to conceal. For many years, warnings about haunting secret rituals, meticulously concealed abuses, and widespread corruption were dismissed, even branded as heresy and slandered as baseless accusations. However, with the public emergence of the leaked videos, those silenced voices are now resonating louder than ever, undeniable and impossible to ignore. These warnings have finally been heard widely, ushering in a new and turbulent era for the Vatican. Currently, the Vatican stands as a fortress more heavily guarded than ever before. The Swiss guards, in their traditional uniforms, patrol the entrances with heightened vigilance, while sturdy steel barricades have been erected to block the growing crowds of protesters gathering outside the gates of the Holy See. Inside, Pope Francis still holds the central position, but his appearances are now almost exclusively confined to solemn ceremonies under maximum protection, along with private meetings with his most trusted advisors. Rumors have been circulating endlessly that assassination attempts have been thwarted within the heart of the Vatican, and that conservative factions within the Church are desperately seeking to remove the Pope using the darkest methods. However, Pope Francis neither confirms nor denies these rumors, remaining silent in the face of all the gossip and speculation. For many, this silence carries more meaning than any words. It serves as a symbol of perseverance, pain, and even helplessness in the face of the powerful forces opposing him in this difficult and complex struggle. Within the magnificent walls of the Vatican, a fierce power struggle is quietly unfolding. conservative factions, fueled by the current chaos, are vigorously lobbying to strip Pope Francis of his power. They claim that the recent leaks and revelations were orchestrated by Francis himself, with the aim of destroying and weakening the traditional power structures of the Church. Meanwhile, those who support reform and progress stand by the Pope, believing that exposing corruption and abuse of power is essential to pave the way for genuine and thorough reforms within the Church. The divide and rift between factions within the Vatican have deepened, leading to a complete fragmentation of the Church into multiple interest groups, with covert schemes, calculations, and power struggles playing out behind closed doors. While this internal power struggle continues within the Vatican, the most profound and tangible impact is felt by the faithful around the world, those who now face a difficult and challenging crossroads. Some believers remain steadfast in their faith, refusing to let the shocking revelations shake their spirits. They continue to hold their devotion, trusting that the sins of individuals cannot tarnish the sanctity of the Church established by God. They believe that the Church is a divine entity that transcends the failings of its members, and that is why they cling to and preserve their faith. However, alongside this, there is a large segment of believers who cannot bear the immense shock and disappointment. They turn their backs on the organization that has been the spiritual foundation and way of life for them for many generations, abandoning their faith and leaving their parishes. Parishes around the world are struggling to maintain their congregations, and the churches and confessionals, once filled with whispered sins and forgiveness, have now become eerily empty and desolate. The decline in participation in religious rituals and activities has led to a decrease in financial contributions, something unprecedented in the long history of the Vatican. For the first time, the Catholic Church is facing a financial crisis not of its own making, but as an inevitable consequence of a deep crisis of faith. Charitable programs, social organizations, and missionary missions around the world, which were funded by donations and contributions from believers, are having to scale back or cease operations due to a lack of resources. The flow of funds that once came freely is now frozen, and the Church's social, educational, and healthcare activities are also being severely impacted. The consequences of the scandal are not only limited to the spiritual realm, but have also spread to education and healthcare sectors. In many countries, where the Church plays a key role in managing schools and hospitals, governments have begun conducting comprehensive investigations to review the operations and finances of these institutions. Decades of autonomous operation, with little oversight, are now facing the risk of being scrutinized and audited more closely than ever before. Each audit further exposes layers of corruption, mismanagement, and past scandals that were previously hidden. However, amid the turmoil and chaos, there are still voices of hope and change. Reformers within the Church, progressive bishops and priests, have spoken out strongly, calling for a new era of transparency, accountability, and justice. In Brazil, the Philippines, and some regions in Africa, many bishops have made public statements condemning corruption and committing to take decisive actions to cleanse their dioceses of abuse and poor financial management. For many believers and observers, this is the first sign that profound change may be possible, a glimmer of hope that the Church can still be redeemed and reborn from its own wounds. Although initially remaining silent during the first phase of the response, Pope Francis eventually decided to address the faithful in a live broadcast from the Vatican. His voice was warm and steady, clearly bearing the weight of the painful revelations he was facing. He said that the truth is not always beautiful, and sometimes it is painful, but it is necessary in order to move forward. The Pope emphasized that the Church had long hidden behind the walls of tradition, pretending that only faith could protect people from their own mistakes. But that era had come to an end. His words sent a powerful shockwave through the global Catholic community. Some praised him as a courageous reformer, someone willing to confront and break the corruption despite the personal and political costs. On the other hand, many condemned him as a heretic, accusing him of betraying the Church and the values he had sworn to protect. No matter what, one thing is undeniable. Change is coming, whether the Church is prepared for it or not. The global repercussions of the leaked videos show no signs of ending. Investigations and oversight continue to expand. Whistleblowers are increasingly brave in stepping into the spotlight, while governments around the world begin to reconsider their political, social, and financial relationships with the Church, an institution once considered untouchable. For the first time in its long and complex history, the Vatican faces profound vulnerability, where its most closely guarded secrets have been laid bare in the light of day and under the gaze of the public. These leaked videos have opened a new, challenging chapter for the Church, one that forces this ancient religious institution to confront itself, to find a way to move beyond the darkness of its secrets, deceit, and lies, and to move toward a future that is more transparent, just, and sincere. This crisis not only changes the world's perception of the Church, but also forces each of us to deeply reflect on the values of faith, ethics, and the responsibility of those in power. Can the Church truly carry out meaningful reforms, eradicate corruption, and restore the trust of millions of believers worldwide, or will it continue to sink into the darkness of secrets, deception, and power struggles? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. The history of the Church has turned a completely new page, one that is full of upheaval and uncertainty. Thank you all for watching the video. If you found this information useful and interesting, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the latest updates. And as always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your different perspectives. See you in the next videos, and remember, the truth always finds a way to emerge. Have a great day.